by phone Sinn Féin's leader and the leader of the opposition, Mary Lou McDonald, and she joins me on line one. Mary Lou, good morning.
Good morning, Neil. How are you?
I'm
Happy
good.
New Year.
And you too. So this is where we're at. It must be frustrating for you to be kind of like a hurler on the ditch on this, watching, looking on, wondering, if you'd done things differently, you could be driving the bus. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not a hurler. As much as I love the great game of hurling, we are not hurlers on the ditch. But you're right, we're not in government. So our job in these very, very difficult times for people, Neil, is on the one hand to be constructive, to be helpful, because we're in a very, very tough times, but also to hold the government to account. To, as Jack Charlton might have it, put them under a bit of pressure.
And now, what would you put them under pressure?
Right. Well, let me just give you my overall take as to where we're at. And by the way, I'm mindful in this new year that we're talking in a scenario where many people haven't seen a day's work in almost a year, where people have been sick, where life has been lost, where people feel isolated, under pressure, frustrated, all of those emotions. And I think in circumstances like that, and where people are being asked to make the most extraordinary of sacrifices and their lives have been turned upside down, the least you can expect is that you have a government that has its homework done, that is fit to plan and to consult and to collaborate, just to ensure that you can minimise risk, but that in an orderly way, to the best of our ability, that you can actually take people through these extraordinarily difficult times. And I think last week, Neil, with the whole debacle around schools, they were opening, they weren't opening, mixed messages, confusion, and clearly lack of preparation from government was exactly what we do not.
No, the government, they had their mind made up on that. Secondary schools would open, and then it was Leaving Cert students, and the unions put the kibosh on that. So what can you do when the unions tell the teachers don't go to school?
Well, it wasn't just quite as you've reflected it there. For a number of days, we got mixed messages. The schools were opening, they weren't sure if they were opening. It was very obvious to everybody concerned, and all of us want our children in education. I'm a parent myself. I know that the disruption to services and education is hugely, hugely difficult, but it was very clear, given the level of transmission, that having 1 million children going to school simply wouldn't be safe. And then the botched decision around the Leaving Cert students, as my friend and Corkman, your fellow Corkman, Donach O'Leary, very clearly stated, where you have a spike amongst young adults, where there has been no specific health advice sought or given around the safety of these students and their teachers, and where there was no proper consultation with the unions or anyone else, well then how on earth were you going to say that Leaving Cert students were going back to school? It was an absolute mess. So if you were, even more so than for students and young people with special and additional needs, and I know that they and their families and their carers have been devastated by this toing and froing. And I just want to make this simple point. It is absolutely the case that we all want children and young people with special and additional needs to have the services and the support and the education that they require. That is essential. And equally for all other students, and in particular the exam classes. But it's not good enough for government just to make these announcements and statements in a vacuum. For that to happen, you actually have to have done the work. You have to have the contingencies, the resources and the consultation done. That wasn't done. And to my mind, I found that extremely alarming.
Yeah, but it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating for them.
Acceptable.
It's very frustrating for them as well, because everything changes. It's very fluid every day. I mean, where would you be on schools closed, creches closed, special needs education ground to a halt? Would you have done all of that?
With the levels of high transmission, the public health advice indicating that everyone has to stay home, stay safe. Yes, I would.
Well, then they did the right thing. So where's the problem?
Well, no. Here's the essential difference. What I would also have done is to have all of the contingency planning done in advance. So, for example, we are in agreement that children with special and additional needs and young people are an absolute priority. And there's no disagreement or controversy on that. The difficulty is that the necessary planning and consultation with that sector, with those who provide the education services and care, had not been done in advance. That's the problem. So I very much hope that now, after all of the mess, that now in these weeks ahead, that the government is now doing its work in an orderly and correct fashion and figuring out, in line with public health advice, how to get those students back to their services and to their supports in a way that is safe for them, their families, and for their teachers and those that support them in every imaginable way. And equally with the Leaving Cert, for example, because I know there's a lot of absolute concern around that. I mean, the truth is, in answer to the question of will there be a normal Leaving Certificate exam, the answer to that, in my view, is ideally, in the best of circumstances, yes, and that's what we should aim for. But we also have to have plans laid out and understood by students and teachers and families as to what will happen in the event that that's not possible.
Are you suggesting predictive grades then, or are you saying a predicted grade, or would you say a place in college for everybody?
Well, what I'm saying is, in the first instance, that the plans A and B and C need to be thought out and presented so that everybody who is facing into these exams, everybody who teaches in our schools, all of those concerned, actually have a sense of, right, if it is possible the exam goes ahead in these circumstances. If that's not possible, here's what the predicted grading system might look like. Here's how it will work. And here's the learnings that we have had from last year. And by the way, and in fairness, again, to my colleague Donnacha O'Leary, who's our spokesperson on education, he has been asking the Minister for months, actually since the summertime, to start setting out what those contingency plans might look like. And the truth is that he got very little by way of response. And then we walked into this difficulty in the new year. So to my mind, the absolute priority now for good government and for keeping social stability and for assisting all of society through difficult times is planning, consultation. And I think it is deeply disappointing that those have not been the guiding lights of this government so far, and I very much hope that will change.
Are they found wanting on the vaccine, do you think? Because they're talking about as low as 150,000 people vaccinated by the end of February. When we hear in the UK, I know that there are other European countries as slow as well, but they're saying in the UK that everybody within the United Kingdom will be vaccinated by the end of the summer. I mean, with the way we're going, it'll be next year for many people. Like, why is it so slow?
Yeah, everybody is asking that question. And the truth is that, for example, in the north, they're well ahead of us in terms of the level of vaccination. Some of that is down to supply. I mean, bear in mind that the AstraZeneca, the Oxford vaccine, as it's called, is available to them. It's easier to administer it, and we are advised here that as and when this vaccine gets European approval, that it will be a game changer, we're told, in terms of the vaccination rollout here. So there's two issues. There's the issue of supply, and then there's the issue of distribution. And what we are trying to ascertain, Neil, as the leaders of the opposition, is that supply will be secured and will be ratcheted up, and that when the supply lands on our shores, that we actually have the right number of personnel, we have the right approach to very efficiently distribute the vaccine, because there's no sense in having it and stockpiling it and it not being distributed to the population.
But are they not talking about mass vaccination centres? Do you know anything about that? When that will be and where that will be?
Exactly. Well, so that is amongst the information that we are still seeking. We don't have that information, Neil. It has not been made available to us. But we need to know, and not alone do we need to know, we need to know so that the wider society knows where these mass vaccination centres will happen, what the timelines are around it, what's their expected capacity, what's their, and so on. The plan needs to, if you like, become very real for people And that is a challenge. I wish everybody concerned in this enterprise nothing but the very best of good luck. And I hope this is a runaway success. I hope that people feel reassured from the advice and guidance that they will get from medics and from scientists as to the safety of these vaccines. And I hope that we can build up, and we need to build up the capacity to deliver it. But it will be a challenge, and we're engaged with the government constantly. I mean, day and daily. I know, for example...
But 35 to 40,000 doses a week by comparison to 200,000 vaccines a day in the UK. Why have they got so much more? Is it because they're not in the EU, they just bought whatever they wanted?
Well, they're not now in the EU, and it is
the UK. I mean, the EU.
It is also because they have access to the AstraZeneca vaccine, as I've said. And look, I'm not on your programme to give cover or to make excuses for anyone, for the HSE, the health authorities, or indeed for the government in this regard. This is a huge challenge. They need to get it right. We have concerns around the distribution capacity and about supply, but we're working with government. We're constantly scrutinising them, keeping the pressure on. And yes, we need to up the ante. We need greater supply. That means we need to keep the pressure on Pfizer and others. Moderna now, their vaccine has been cleared. And then AstraZeneca, I understand that there are some queries around the data, but that those matters have been resolved and will be resolved. And I just hope that it gets European clearance and that we can up the supply. But then once the supply comes, Neil, the point I'm making is you have to be sure that you have sufficient trained personnel, that you have the right approach, that you have these centres up and running, and then it's a case of getting it out to as many people in a tiered fashion, working in an order of priority.
And are you okay? Are you okay with the tiered fashion in which there's 15 different categories, and we know where we're at now? Frontline health workers are getting it. People in long-term residential care, staff, residents, and things like that on site. But there's a lot of different categories. It's going to take a long time before it gets down to, people who can go about their life, who are healthy, who want to get back to work. The economic consequences of this, never mind anxiety and health issues. You see this morning's Irish Times talking about the Independent talking about the rise in antidepressants, for instance. I mean, is the category rollout right?
Well, yes, you have to do this on a categorization of priority. Let me explain to you why. So, for example, our frontline health workers, obviously, having them vaccinated and safe means that you're cutting down on the level of sickness, of isolation, self-isolation, and of absenteeism in the health services. Your listeners will have seen stories over the last days and weeks setting out the level, the numbers of staff that were self-isolated.
Hundreds in Cork, not just medical staff, actually, nurses and doctors and workers.
The whole lot. I mean all of the. I regard like a porter and the catering staff in the same, and the cleaning staff in the same.
But there are hundreds and hundreds of Gardaí out. Like, why aren't they? Being done?
Yes. And of course, and that's where the prioritisation comes in. So your first stop is your frontline health services, because for the hospitals, and they are under immense pressure, as we know, they can ill afford to lose staff or to have people sick or self-isolation. So there's the logic for that. And then it works through, obviously, those in residential care. I think all of us accept, given what happened in our nursing homes in the last spring, that can't happen again. So I think people understand the logic for that. And thereafter, older people, the older age groups, people with underlying conditions who are deemed to be more at risk, I think there's an understandable logic there. And then, yes, of course there's the case for members of An Garda Síochána who are interfacing with people day in, daily. There's also a strong case, by the way, for home carers, bearing in mind that more than half of the care work in this state is undertaken by home carers, so they're carrying a massive amount of the societal burden at this time. They need to be mentioned and they need to be vaccinated also. So all of this, I don't think this should turn into pitting one set of people against another. Ultimately, we need to get the majority of the population.
But how much of this is our own fault, though? I mean, we did get the warnings before Christmas, NEFIT and all, we're all saying, don't relax going up to, I mean, was it worth it, that 5 days where unfortunately too many people didn't heed the warnings and the advice?
Well, I would say to you two things on that. I would say, number one, it was my view, and it remains my view, that given the year that people had put in, when Christmas came, there had to be some give. People needed the company and comfort of their families to some extent. It wasn't like, I mean, I don't know, in your house, certainly in my household, it was not a normal Christmas at all. And it was a very, very quiet Christmas. People that I'm talking to are reporting that it was, a very, very small and very quiet Christmas. I think for the most part, people were sensible and were reasonable. You were always going to have the exceptions, but I think that there had to be that level of give. However, what should not have happened, and what should still not be happening, is the fact that we have such a loose and ineffective system of protection when people land on the island. And we have argued this, Neil, for months in the Dáil and with ministers and with government.
That the border should have been closed?
Every Irish airport and port, if you land on our island, you should have, as a matter of obligation, a negative test. And then when you're in Ireland, a number of days later, you should have a mandatory second test. And furthermore, the system of isolation and quarantine needs to be mandatory, needs to be enforced. Those things didn't happen over Christmas. Those things have not happened at all. They're still not in place, bar a move, I mean a welcome move, but it's a very minimal move in terms of the requirement for a test if you're coming from Britain or South Africa. Like we are an island. We are dealing with a very difficult situation, and the last thing we need is to be importing more of the virus and different strains wherever they may come from.
Do you think that people should not?
That is a big failure.
Would it be much simpler if people were told not to come home over Christmas then, wouldn't it? Or to refuse to allow them?
Well, I think any travel onto the island must be essential. I mean, people simply shouldn't be coming. And I've been saying that I was saying that last summer. We've been saying that all along. I think when people came home at Christmas, you have to be mindful if there were particular circumstances in a family that on compassionate grounds warranted travel. Well, I understand that. And we said in the run up to the holiday period, we had to be very careful, but we also had to have a common sense, and we also had to have compassion. But the facts were then, and the facts still are now, people shouldn't be coming onto the island unless it's essential. And certainly under no circumstances should people be coming through our ports and airports without the negative test, as I say, a second test 5 days in, and crucially monitored, enforced isolation and quarantine. And those things we still don't have. And we've argued the toss on this for months. We've had a very strong conversation with unionist colleagues in the north who have a difficulty with this notion of an all-island approach in this regard. But for us, this isn't about big politics or constitutional politics. This is about common sense, and it's about keeping people safe.
Okay. I mean, if you look at where we're at now, I think you seem to be agreeing with where we're at with regards to, the closing down and pausing of the economy, and also very much critical of the slow pace of the vaccine and what have you, and many people texting me are saying the same. Why is it so slow? Why won't it be faster? We've covered an awful lot of ground.
I understand that. And the other thing is this, Neil, that I'm also conscious now.
But the point I wanted to ask you was, do we really need the likes of Stephen Donnelly and Micheál Martin and Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar spouting off on a daily basis all of this doom and gloom? We see it again in the papers this morning where they're talking talking about, Leo Varadkar saying we're only in the start of this. It's going to get worse. More and more people are going to die. The economy will be shut for 3 months. Is any of that actually needed? Should we not just be dealing with this on a daily basis rather than all of this doomsday predictions for the months to come?
Well, I'm the last one for doomsday predictions. I think, and I always say to our colleagues, our job is to alleviate pressure, not to cause it, and to be leaderly in how we address all of these issues. I mean, people have to be given, and nobody would thank you, Neil, in journalism or in politics for not setting out the facts of the current scenario. People know that we are in very great difficulty. But I think the message from everyone in leadership, but particularly from government, needs to be that we are organised, that we have a plan, that we know how to minimise risk, that we will look and move heaven and earth to reopen particularly essential services. And we talked about special education earlier on. And then also this, that the government and the state will step in and support people, families, workers and businesses in these times.
They are and have been since March.
Well, hold on. Well, let me give you an example. The PUP payment, and we've debated that with them many times. They were going to cut it. Now they haven't, and that's fine. Let me acknowledge all of those things. But let me mention one thing to you. And it's on the issue of people with big mortgages, whether they're for their family home or business mortgages. Last autumn, Pierce Doherty and I and all of us in Sinn Fein said to the government that they needed to extend the mortgage breaks for people to ensure that they could get that level of relief that they needed and that their credit rating would not be impaired. We also said that these breaks should be without interest. Interest shouldn't be paid in the period of the break.
So if you were in power, would you be able to force that?
The government, at that time, they could do it because the European regulator allowed it, but the clock was ticking and time ran out and the government missed that opportunity. However, a new opportunity has now arisen again because the European authorities, recognising continent-wide, globally, the surge now in this virus, they again allow for the provision of these mortgage breaks. And the government needs to step in now. They need to do now what they should have done in the autumn time, and they need to afford that level of relief. And it's things like that, Neil. It's messages like that that I think above all else are powerful coming from a government, because it says to people that we recognise the pressure you're under, through no fault of your own, that people are struggling, as you have said quite correctly, with isolation and depression and all of those really difficult human things, but also financially struggling. So the government has to do everything, move every power to ensure that we afford those kind of support.
Can I just ask you, because you said, and this is finally, you said you're not a party of divisiveness. Mind you, Eddie Hobbs at the weekend tweeted that there is no political organisation like Sinn Fein. Just like Donald Trump, Sinn Fein is a lightning rod that attaches itself to anger. That Sinn Fein is all about looking to stoke up anger, just like Trump. Bearing in mind, I mean, you talk about senior party members. You also had party members, and since I spoke to you last, who've taken a hammering over their social media postings. We had going way back to Up the Ra and things like that. Then the insults to the gay community, the Jewish community, the unionists in the north. We heard about the bombings of years back. Your own St. Patrick's Day Brits Out stance. When I say that to you, it seems to me that Sinn Féin has a problem with being inclusive of everybody and is quite divisive when I mention all of that.
Well, we could have a long conversation about social media and the correct use of it, and using your cop on and being thoughtful about what you post and how things said in one way are interpreted and understood and felt in another. I think we dealt quite extensively with those matters. And I mean, I'm at pains to urge everybody, people in public life, I suppose, most particularly, but all others, to be thoughtful before you post anything. It might sound fine in your head or according to your logic, but just bear in mind that's not necessarily how it will be read or understood. And real hurt and real damage can be caused by social media postings. But I would also have to say this to you. I mean, Sinn Fein is a government that is a party that's about bringing real change, constructive change. We want houses built. I mean, if you're saying that it's divisive to be angry about the fact that young couples, that young people, that people who've been on housing lists for years, in some cases for decades, can't have a steady, stable roof over their head. I mean, I'm angry about that. I think everyone should be angry about that. And I want something done about it. And I believe that Sinn Fein can lead the politics.
All you're going to be left with I just listed out some of the things that were divisive by members of Sinn Fein on their Twitter and Facebook page, having a go at marginalised or smaller communities, which seemed like bullying to me.
Sorry, I do not accept that Sinn Fein in any forum has a go at marginalised and disadvantaged communities. I think you might be confusing us with others for whom that is their stance. Far from it. Sinn Fein is a party that is about equality. It's about inclusion. We're a party that represents directly very, very many marginalised and forgotten communities right across the island. So I have to correct you on that. That is entirely untrue. And I think if I can again point to Cork itself, and if I can direct you to the likes of Thomas Gould or to Pat Buckley or to Donegal or to any of the Sinn Fein people across Cork City and County, I would now tell you that anyone who knows our work in your own city and county will acknowledge that we are far from perfect, but my God, we are a party that's all about equality and inclusion.
Okay. Just finally, are you guys actually going to work in the Dáil, or is it limited numbers, or what's happening?
Yeah, it seems, well, here's the irony, the great irony, when there was the whole debate about Leaving Cert students going back and the government trying to make a case for that. At the same time, they were saying that only 45 TDs can now gather in the convention centre here in Dublin, which is a vast arena, as you know. So the contrast and the irony of that wasn't lost on anyone. But anyway, in any eventuality, we'll be meeting for 2 days this week on Wednesday and Thursday in the convention centre. There was a move by government to minimise days, to minimise contact, including committee meetings. And we all accept that we have to be safe. I absolutely accept that. But we also know that the Dáil has to meet, particularly at times of great difficulty and crisis, because the government has to be held to account, and people want answers. People want to know what direction we're going in.
Who leaked the mother and baby homes report?
Pardon me?
Who leaked the mother and baby homes report?
Well, that, Neil, is a very good question. Whoever did broke the law. And you've heard, I don't need to reiterate, you've heard the anger of survivors, of advocates and so on. It's a shameful thing and a disgraceful thing to do that. And I think a very bad start to what's going to be a really difficult number of days for people. I think the apology from government is essential. That level of acknowledgement is so important. But then the issue of redress is critical. We don't need tears and sympathy alone. We need real redress, and that has to include things like access to people's records and files, access to birth certificates. It has to mean, of course, social supports, financial supports.
They say they're going to go after the religious for more money. That's right, isn't it?
Well, that's absolutely. I mean, but just bear in mind that the churches have a case to answer here. Absolutely, of that there is no doubt. And the Catholic and indeed the Protestant institutions that offended and behaved in this illegal way and breached human rights left, right and centre. But always remember, Neil, this happened on the watch of the state. This happened on the watch of the Irish state and successive government. So there's apologies to be made and questions to be answered, all right, but front and centre have to be the victims and survivors. And so that leaking yesterday was really unforgivable.
Just very finally, and this is off topic completely, but it is historical, and we talk about historical events in this country involving the mother and baby homes. There was a story we were dealing with on air last week, which was to do with Michael Collins' cap and his uniform. Are you across that they are now saying that the hat, which has a bullet hole from Bale na Blá, cannot be put on display anymore? I mean, is that PC gone mad? Isn't that part of our history that we need? Yeah.
Yeah,
think?
I think it is. No, I wasn't. No more than yourself. I just saw an account of this in the newspapers, and I saw some kind of logic advance for it. I think it's. I think Mick Collins's cap should be on display. I think there's no. You can't sugarcoat what happened. Yeah. In Irish history, nor should you take from the very considerable bravery of people who fought the fight for Irish freedom, and nowhere perhaps more so than in the rebel county. So yeah, I was kind of taken aback by that. I don't see any good reason not to have Michael Collins's cap on display.
Thanks for taking the call, Mary Lou. Covered a lot of ground. I'll let you get on. Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Neil.
Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Neil.
Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much, Neil.